You know, out of all the video game companies that work with Nintendo over the years, I think Rare is easily the one that impacted the company the most. Like, ever since they started working with Nintendo, they kept releasing hit after hit after hit, with the biggest impact that the studio's ever made is easily with the Donkey Kong Country series. As these people took the classic monkey game and turned it into one of Nintendo's biggest franchise that recently got a big theme park in Universal. Although, if you're not thinking of Donkey Kong when you think of Rare and Nintendo, then Banjo-Kazooie is probably a close second. As out of all the non-Nintendo series Rare has created, I think Banjo-Kazooie is easily their most popular one out of all. Especially if you're asking something about like the 3D platformer genre, where this or Super Mario 64 is the one that we're going to be talking about a lot of. Like, this actual series is not really that big compared to like other big platform franchises, but despite that, it's still a beloved series for a lot of Nintendo fans, to the point where even though that these days it's owned by... they were still able to appear in big games like Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which honestly very shows you like how much this series is beloved. And as for my personal history with the series, well, I started playing Banjo-Kazooie during like my middle school days, as I was able to snag myself a copy of this game on eBay, and man, when I first booted it up, I just could not put it down. As someone who is a massive fan of like the 3D platformer genre, this is a game that just truly clicked with me just like that. A lot of pretty fun movesets with a lot of great worlds to explore. As well as for being a collectathon platformer, it really truly perfected the aspect of it being a collectathon. You know, funniest thing is that Banjo-Kazooie is one of those videos that I really wanted to make for a very long time now. And I feel like now I'm finally ready to make a full-on video of this game. Now, usually when I do videos, I usually try to do it the most official way possible. In fact, I was originally going to be playing this game on my Nintendo Switch through the NSO, but then suddenly, out of complete nowhere, a bunch of fans was able to release a full-on PC port of Banjo-Kazooie. Which now means is that everyone can basically play this game in widescreen at 60 FPS. And my god, playing this game again at a higher frame rate is such a different experience. And actually setting it up is very simple. All you have to do is just download the port and get a ROM, and bada boom, you're now playing the Funny Bear game. But before we start talking about this game, I think it's very appropriate to talk about like the backstory of Banjo-Kazooie. As before this game became the iconic collectathon platformer, it was actually originally going to be an RPG for the Super Nintendo. As after the release of Donkey Kong Country, Rare decided to try and dabble in a different genre with their fancy, dancy new 3D graphics. However, long story short, this game ended up being a bit too ambitious for Rare. And after seeing Super Mario 64 in action, they decided to rework the entire game from an RPG into a 3D platformer. The main character in this game was originally going to be a human, but then it became a bear, and then bada boom, Banjo was born. Although before he started his own game, he actually debuted beforehand in a game called Diddy Kong Racing. And I know a lot of this is basically common knowledge for a lot of people, but yeah, it's basically common knowledge. But with everything out of the way, let's get started. Alrighty, so when you boot up the game, you're greeted with a cute little opening cutscene with Banjo and Kazooie playing with their instruments. I like how the vibe of this kind of gives me the similar impression of like watching an opening scene from a cartoon show. As this moment here kind of gives you a good idea on what the game is going to be like. And I always love the part when Mumbo barges in and you can see Banjo clearly irritated. But anyway, so story begins in this very eerie tower when this wicked witch named Gruntilda decides to talk to her cauldron, as she asks the talking pod on who is the prettiest being of them all. And considering the fact that Gruntilda looks like a type of person that would probably kidnap children, the cauldron say that there's another person on the island that's much prettier than Gruntilda. As located within Spiral Mountain is this cute little bear girl named Tootie, and as the cauldron puts it, she's the prettiest being of them all. And so, out of complete anger and jealousy, Gruntilda tried to put a stop on that aspect. And meanwhile, Tootie is just waiting outside of Banjo's house, waiting for her older brother to actually wake up. But unfortunately, Grunty then appears flying all the way down to Spiral Mountain to abduct the poor kid. And so it's now up to Banjo to go up to Grunty's lair and try to save his sister. It's a fairly straightforward plot for a Nintendo 64 title. The fat-ass bear is a good guy, the evil witch is a bad guy. You must go. But despite that, even though that the actual plot itself is very simple, it heavily makes up for it for its execution. As the best way to describe it is that this game fully embraces like the cartoonish ridiculousness of it. with all the characters in this game being very memorable. I personally relate a lot to Banjo being like this chill, laid-back person, while Kazooie is a funny contrast where instead of being very polite, she just constantly insults everyone in her path. To the point where I'm convinced that if Kazooie wasn't an M-rated game, she would probably call literally everyone a slur with no hesitation. And honestly, I kinda love that, especially when she constantly bounces off with Bottles, who is basically her helper throughout this game. And what I love about Bottles is the constant back and forth he and Kazooie have in, like, insulting each other. Like, Kazooie calls Bottles Goggle Boy, while Bottles calls Kazooie stuff like Warm Breath. And then there's Gruntilda, arguably the second most recognizable villain from Rare, right behind the one that actually survived through a Monopoly. And honestly, I really like Grunty as a villain in this game, because I'm a big sucker on, like, villains that are just like these big goofballs. And Grunty, being witch that only speaks in rhymes, is definitely a very funny villain. Like, Grunty kidnapping Tootie because the Cauldron called her more appealing than her is one thing, but it's another when she literally stuck herself in this giant machine that she could barely fit in. And what makes this funny for me is that she's literally in this throughout the entire game. And keep in mind, these are only just like the main characters, because there's even more throughout the entire game, and they also have like their funny moments. And this game is really very committed on reminding you on what your main goal is, because every time you actually try to exit out the game, it'll actually show you the game over cutscene where Grunty was able to succeed her plan. As Grunty was able to turn into like this fashion model, while poor old Tootie became horribly mutated in the process. But the funniest aspect is one of Banjo's allies just come out of freaking nowhere to ask Grunty out. I guess there was something funny going on with Mumbo's Jumbo, I guess. Now, as for the actual gameplay, as I mentioned before, Banjo-Kazooie takes a lot of inspiration of Super Mario 64. But what sets Banjo apart compared to Mario is that he has a fairly versatile moveset. When you start the game, your moveset is fairly limited because all you can do is just run, jump, and just use your claws. Banjo can even do a roll similar to Donkey Kong. However, things get very interesting when Kazooie comes into play, and yes, even with Kazooie's loud mouth, she is a very essential character for Banjo. Like, for example, when Banjo jumps, Kazooie can use her wings to make them hover for a little bit. And not just that, but also they can even do stuff like a crouch jump and ground pound similar to Mario. And also, very early on in the game, you'll be able to learn this special move called the Talon Trot, which not only lets the dude to run even faster, but also go on steeper inclines. And this is only scratching the surface, because the more you play through the game, the more moves Banjo-Kazooie will able to do. And what I like about this is that they introduce them in a very natural way. Like, when you start the game, you're basically traveling throughout the entirety of Spiral Mountain, which is basically a tutorial area, where it gives you a bit of a good idea on the moveset Banjo and Kazooie can do. But later on in the game, we're in like this big open area. Bottles will teach you some moves that has a big focus on verticality, like the super jump, as well as Kazooie able to fly up in the air. And you can fly around as much as you want depending on how much feathers you have. And I think this is the best aspect of Banjo-Kazooie, is that the more you proceed through the game, the more gradually the game gets more and more complex. Now obviously when it comes to Banjo-Kazooie, the biggest aspect of the gameplay is the Collectathon aspect. And I know this type of gameplay is very divisive for a lot of people, like some of them love it while some of them really hate it. As it's an aspect that people can really mess it up easily. I mean, Rare was kinda guilty with it with some of their games. But despite that, I honestly think Banjo-Kazooie is one of the few games that handles the Collectathon perfectly. As literally, every single collectible in this game has a very important purpose. Like with the smaller things, you collect stuff like eggs and feathers. And as I mentioned before, you need these just so Banjo-Kazooie can do certain moves. Throughout each of the worlds, there's also these 2 special hidden honeycombs where if you collect all 6 of them, you'll be able to get even more health for Banjo. But the most important collectibles in this game are easily with the Jiggies and Note Pieces. As for all the levels in this game, they all contain about 10 Jiggies as well as 100 Note Pieces. Collecting Note Pieces is very easy, as they're basically like the coins from Mario 64, with the real challenge is trying to get all 100 of them. But unlike Super Mario 64, all the Note Pieces is way more essential because you need them to progress through the game. And then there's the Jiggies, which are the actual primary collectibles you're going to be looking for throughout the entire game. As there are 3 ways to find Jiggies throughout the entire world. The first way is them just being out in the open, so the only way to actually do it is doing either a platform challenge or trying to find one that's well hidden. The second way to do Jiggies is either doing a challenge or helping one of the NPCs throughout the levels. And the third and final way is that throughout the levels, there's these special creatures known as the Jinjos. As they've been all scattered across the land by Grunties, they'll have to Banjo to try and rescue them. Although rescue is a bit of a stretch because a lot of the times they're just like standing out in the open. Like, do you actually need saving, or are you just like my cat that always needs attention? Alrighty, so now as for the actual worlds themselves, this is the one I really wanted to save for a little bit later in the video, because all 10 of the main areas in this game are pretty cool. Like, I already talked a little bit about, like, Spiral Mountain and such. But the actual levels in this game are easily the big highlights, and it's the thing that really makes this game all come together very well. So for the main hub of this game, it's located within Grunty's lair, which is this giant fortress that's shaped like her head. Again, you can clearly tell this game was made by the Donkey Kong people. But anyway, so Grunty's lair is basically like Peach's castle, where it's the main area where you need to go to get to each of the worlds. But unlike Peach's castle, Grunty's lair is way more dangerous with way more hazards to go, as well as having a lot more secrets and its own collectibles, so in a way, it's kind of like its own level. But anyway, so here's how progression works in this game. In order to proceed through Grunty's lair, you're going to need a lot of music notes, as throughout the areas, there's going to be these big doors that requires a certain amount. And as for the actual levels, well, in order to proceed through them, you're going to need a certain amount of jiggies, kind of like the stars from Mario 64. As throughout Grunty's lair, there's these special paintings where if you fill up them with puzzle pieces, you're able to access the levels. Mumbo's Mountain is the very first level in this game, and it's honestly a very good beginner level. As the area is very simple enough for you to get a very good grasp, but open enough for it not to get very boring in repeat playthroughs. As every corner in this area has you do something. Like, there's this one area with a giant gorilla named Conga that has about 3 jiggies that you have to find. Plus, since this area has a big emphasis on steep elevation, this is when the talent trot comes into play. And finally, this level gives you a good idea on the certain gimmick that this game has, which is transformations. As for certain levels of this game, they'll have a special HUD, and within is Mumbo, the best shaman in all of the game. As he'll be able to transform Banjo depending on how many Mumbo tokens you have, which is another collectible that's hidden throughout the levels. And as for something like Treasure Trove Cove, so the more levels you play through the game, the more and more it gets slowly more open. As this level has a big focus on verticality, as this is when Kazooie is able to learn to fly. And this is also the area where it has a bit of a boss fight with this giant hermit crab. With the funniest aspect of this is that this entire boss could have been avoided if Kazooie didn't keep her mouth shut. And then there's Clanker's Cavern, which I'll be completely honest, when I first played this game all those years ago, this is the level that had me on edge, all because of the fact that it has a big focus on you going underwater. With this air meter where if it goes all the way down, then it's an instant kill for Banjo. And my god, they were freaking evil for you to have to go all the way down to the deepest part of this level, just so you can slowly wind out this key, with the only way to refill your air is this one freaking fish. But other than that, the rest of the level is pretty cool as you're going in the inside of this giant mechanical shark whale, I guess? Who I know looks horrifying for a lot of people, but despite that, he's surprisingly pretty friendly to Banjo. As he's actually this poor fella that's stuck in this toxic waste area, being Grunty's garbage disposal. And as for a level like Bubble Glue Swamp, this is another pretty good example where I mentioned is that every corner of this level has something new to do. Like there's this one area where there's this giant egg where you have to slowly break down. While another section, you're doing this small matching minigame with these turtles within a giant turtle. Not all the missions in this game are winners, like I'm not really a big fan of like the Mr. Vile section. As this whole section is that you need to eat a lot more yummies than Mr. Vile, and I swear to god, every single time I do this, I just barely beat him. Especially at the near end when the whole shtick is that you have to go back and forth with red and yellow. And then after this level, here comes probably my favorite level in this entire game, Freeze Easy Peak. As the best way to describe this area is that it's probably the most Christmassy feeling thing you'll ever see in a video game. As the whole thing is located in this snowy mountain with this giant snowman as the centerpiece. And I love how all the missions in this game has a very Christmas theme to it, like you're helping these light bulbs try to get in without getting eaten by the monsters. And there's even these poor kids that Banjo helps try to get their Christmas presents back. And also this happens. I don't really have that much to say about Gobi's Desert because it's your basic kind of like desert level in a platformer. Like the level design in this area is pretty fine, the puzzles are fine. Although this level does contain probably the funniest gag in my opinion with this poor camel named Gobi. Where when you first meet him, he's this poor animal that's chained up that Banjo was able to rescue. But unfortunately, after this, every time you meet with poor Gobi, it's nothing but animal cruelty. As unfortunately, every single time he appears, he's mostly used for a tool for Banjo and Kazooie. Like, this level is literally called Gobi Desert, and you literally made Gobi run away from his own home. But after that, we head straight forward to something called Mad Monster Mansion. Where in this area, you're exploring this giant haunted area, with so many different secrets and nooks and crannies all over the place. So for the most part, a lot of these levels are pretty stellar, but unfortunately with something like Rusty Bucket Bay, I can honestly say this is probably my least favorite one, which is probably a common opinion for a lot of people who played this game. Not to say like this level was bad or anything, I still think it's pretty good, it's just that I feel like this one has a bit more hurdles compared to the other levels. Like, I think 70% of this level is pretty good, but it's just like this one section that became a big hurdle for me personally, and I think if you're very familiar with it, you're probably gonna know. Which is this one section where you're going within this engine room that has the tightest platforming in this game. Which I know wouldn't sound too bad on paper, I mean Banjo-Kazooie is a platformer and all. But the problem is that the actual controls for this game isn't really built for like very tight platforming like this. Because again, the actual platforming level design relies heavily on exploration and such, not linear stuff like this. And what also doesn't help is that this is the one of the few areas that actually has a bottomless pit, so if Banjo falls, you lose a life. Which wouldn't be a big issue if you're playing stuff like the Xbox 360 version, but if you're playing the N64 version, I swear to God I hope you do this one last. As I mentioned before, one of the big important collectibles you need to get throughout the level are the music notes. As for every world, there's about 100 in each of them, but the biggest challenge for actually collecting them isn't actually finding them, it's actually doing it all with one life. As if you die, you need to collect every single music note again. As the thing is, with the original N64 version, it can keep up the tally of how many music notes you collect, but it can't actually save it due to technical limitations. Which is why when this game was re-released on the Xbox, they were able to remove it. And then finally, for the very last level, we have Click Clock Woods, which is easily the biggest level in the game, with the whole thing is that you're climbing this giant tree, with the main gimmick being is that you're doing this within 4 different seasons. And honestly, after replaying through this game, I can safely say that I think this is probably my second favorite level in this game, right behind Freeze-Easy Peak. As I really love the very charming vibe this level has. The fact that every corner kind of tells its own story, like there's this one section where you're growing this giant flower. Only for the next time you return, Gobi returns where he immediately just goes, "Aw, fuck, it's Banjo!" Like seriously though, this poor camel can't catch a break. But out of all the missions out there, I think the one that really interests me the most is this one where you're trying to feed this bird into full health. Like when you first go into a nest in spring, you just see the bird just hatch. And as you proceed through summer and autumn, you slowly feed the hatchling until it becomes a full-grown bird. Like, a lot of these are just small little details, but it really adds a lot to this game, as like you're going through like a living, breathing cartoon. Which leads to the presentation of Banjo-Kazooie, and I've gotta say, for a fairly late N64 title, this game still looks pretty good. I know the N64 usually gets flagged for its graphics being very dated, especially compared to modern day standards. But despite that, the fact that this game tries to focus so hard on the cartoony aspect really makes this game feel very timeless. Like, there's so much squash and stretch in literally every character in this game that really gives it like a very bouncy vibe. And I really love the fact that they just plastered googly eyes just everywhere in this game. And the music in this game is very stellar. Honestly, it nails like that aforementioned goofy aesthetic, with all the music having like this very cartoony, bouncy vibe. And all of this was done by the legendary Grant Kirkhope, who worked on basically every single Banjo game out there, and even returned as a special guest composer for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It's all very good stuff throughout. Alrighty, so to finally wrap things up for this game's adventure, I think it's very appropriate to talk about the endpoint of this game. Because as soon as you finish collecting basically everything in this game with all the note pieces and jiggies, Grunty has one final special challenge for Banjo to go through. And this final challenge? A quiz show, of course. Yeah, so out of complete freaking nowhere, the final point in this game is that you have to do this big quiz on the entire game that you experience. As Grunty will ask you multiple questions that could be either like a trivia question, or a photo that you have to recognize which level it came from. It can be very intense, especially if you're over like this skull platform where if you answer it wrong, it's an instant death. Honestly, this section is kind of ridiculous, but in the most fun way possible. The only things I didn't really like too much are the personal grunty questions. Because one, in order to figure out these questions, you're gonna have to go ask Grunty's sister that's just walling around in her lair. And second, I do not need to know about her game about doing a freaking striptease. Rated E for everyone. But anyway, so as soon as you finish the quiz show, Grunty runs off with Banjo being able to save his sister. But Grunty has one fall trick up her sleeve to prevent Banjo from stopping her, which is the end credits. Yeah, she literally uses the end credits to stop Banjo. And it's not even like a fake credit screen or anything, no, it's the actual credits for some of these people. Ending's off with Banjo and friends just chillaxing at his place, only for 2 to barge in and tell Banjo, hey, you're not done yet because Grunty's still out there. Alrighty, so it's time for the true final battle, but before you do so, there's only a few more jiggy notes you have to go through. The first one is actually the way to get to the final boss, but there's a few extra ones depending on if you actually went the extra mile. As if you 100% this game, you actually get a pretty cool reward. As one, you're able to stock up on all your items, but most importantly, you can actually double your health for the final boss. Which is honestly very useful, because Grunty as a final boss is surprisingly very challenging. Like, the bosses in Banjo aren't really that hard per se, like a lot of them were pretty easy. But Grunty is something very different because she is very hell-bent on turning Banjo into her next fur coat, as she shoots out so many projectiles for you to dodge, and also it being a 3-phase fight, and things off with the Jinjos actually helping you where you have to restore them so they can attack Grunty. And things off with the mighty Jinjonator having the final blow, as he pushes Grunty all the way from the top of her lair, all the way down to Spiral Mountain where she's buried underneath a giant boulder and cannot leave. And so, the day is saved as Banjo and Kazooie were able to defeat Grunty, while Mumbo Jumbo talks about teasers like Stop and Swap and Banjo-Tooie. But yeah, that was Banjo-Kazooie, and after all these years, this game holds up spectacularly well. Which is honestly very impressive because when it comes to like a lot of N64 games, they don't really hold up the best. But Banjo-Kazooie truly feels like one of those that just feels very timeless. All the levels in this game are pretty stellar and has one of the best pacings I ever played in a 3D platformer. As this game and none of the levels never felt like it outstayed their welcome in any way. And while there were some few low points here and there, like I was still not really a big fan of like the Rusty Bucket Bay stuff, I think overall this game is fantastic. Funniest thing is that before I actually played this game, I had a bit of like doubts about it. Because you know, like that occasional like cringy feeling you have sometimes where you feel like it's like, oh look, this beloved thing might be a bit overrated or overhyped. But no, it's like Banjo-Kazooie was fantastic back then, and Banjo-Kazooie is fantastic still to this very day. And I really gotta mention this again, especially if you're a longtime Banjo fan. I highly recommend trying out the new PC port of this game. It is honestly the best way to play this classic game. I know the franchise right now is in a very bad spot, especially with what company owns it right now. But despite that, I'm still glad that fans are keeping the series alive with a lot of ROM hacks and such. Where we're in a position where it's like, even though we're not getting like official new Banjo games, but at the very least, we're still getting like cool new like hacks and such by fans that really makes it feel like we're playing like a new game or something. But even beyond like the cool fan stuff and the PC port and such, Banjo-Kazooie is just still a fundamentally fun game to play through that really captured the heart for a lot of Nintendo fans. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye-bye!